Welcome back to Black History, Closer Than You Think. I'm Tim Smith, and this is Center of Life, and Black History Closer Than You Think is sponsored by the Social Justice Resource Center. Today, our special guest is a living legend, and his name is Mr. John Moon, but I call him Dr. John Moon, and you'll see why as we go through this interview. Dr. John Moon is among the first EMT workers that America has ever known, and which makes him a living legend. And he has been going across the country and probably other countries to talk to people about this thing that they've done, which started right here in Pittsburgh. And I'm sure many of you don't know about this, but more and more the information is coming out about a thing that was called Freedom House. And today we have John Moon with us today. So we have the doctor right here. And we're so thankful to have you. Thank you for agreeing to come and be a part of us. This is Black History Closer Than We Think. And you know, for people that don't realize it, John Moon lives right here in Pittsburgh. And so, you know, I can't give you his address and everything, but I can tell you he's right here in Pittsburgh. He's closer than we think, even though he's probably traveling all over the world right now. But we are just thankful that you're here and glad that you are able to join us today for this interview.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this honor. You're actually helping me fulfill the desires of my heart, and that's to get this history of EMS out to the world, because it had laid dormant for more than 50 years. And there are still people today that look at EMS systems and think that they have always been there and have no concept of how it began or anything of that nature. So I think it's time now that the world knows where it began and the individuals that were the inventors of it, and the visionaries that were behind it. So I can't thank you enough for this opportunity.
For those who don't know what EMS stands for, can you just...
Yes, EMS is Emergency Medical Services. It's an interesting concept because oftentimes we think when a person is sick or injured, we have to get them to the hospital as fast as we can. But the concept of EMS is to bring the emergency room to the person. And it's not how fast you get them there that determines their outcome, but what's being done for them before they get there. So emergency medical services is essentially an emergency room on wheels that comes to a patient's home or their job or on the street or wherever it happened.
That's just, you know, it's just mind-boggling to just hear you talk about this, because to think that a group of African-American men and women thought of this, that they thought to bring the emergency room to people. When nobody else was thinking about this, you guys figured it out. And circumstances, you know, context is still king and queen. You know, the context of when you were doing this and what made you creative the way it was, what made you as creative as you were back in those days had a lot to do with the discrimination that was going on within our world.
And you're absolutely correct. And, you know, oftentimes you have to kind of go back in history to understand why things evolve as they are today. So what I'd like to do is kind of take you back to the early 60s. In the Pittsburgh area, the Hill District, which was a somewhat neglected, underserved neighborhood at that time. In the 60s, racism perhaps was at an all-time high. So if you take a underserved community, a Black community that was neglected, that was low in unemployment, housing was a problem, and it wasn't just in the community, it was more or less countrywide. So the federal government started putting money into different communities to try to offset the racial inequities that were going on. And out of that, an organization was created by a gentleman by the name of Jim McCoy, and he named it Freedom House. And Freedom House itself was a community organization, and it was primarily responsible for, let's say, voter registration, job training, and employment opportunities. There was even a mini food bank that was located in there. And as this organization thrived, a visionary who was on the board of directors, his name was Phil Hallen, he came up with a vision that said, if this organization, the people that work there, can deliver food to the residents of the Hill District, why can't they deliver medical care? Because you still have people in this community that couldn't make doctor's appointments, didn't have any way to get to the hospital. We had to rely on the police. And unfortunately, the community itself had what I would call an adversarial relationship with the police, which was predominantly white males at that time. So what we have here is a police force that we had to rely on to get you to the emergency room, somewhat lacked empathy and compassion for the residents. And as a result of that, this organization decided to do something about that. So what they did is they had Phil's vision and they said, okay, let's approach the local hospital. So they approached Presbyterian Hospital at that time, which was today is UPMC, and tried to meet with members there to explain to them what their goal, what their vision was. We want to bring something to this community. The group was put in touch with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Peter Safar, who was another visionary. His primary concern was trying to prove to the world that you have to bring care to the person before you bring the person to the care. But no one would believe him. So up comes this group, and they met with Dr. Safar, and in order to get his vision out to the world, he had to train 25 members from Freedom House. And the one requirement that Freedom House, the organization, had was that every one of them had to be Black. So he went on this episode of trying to train, which was very successful, 25 Black men to the most stringent training that had never been done in this country. You're talking about spending time in the emergency room, in the intensive care unit, in the operating room, perhaps at McGee Hospital, monitoring women in labor. We even spent time in the Allegheny County morgue, studying anatomy and physiology. We were the first to take CPR from the hospital out into the street, and all in an effort to bring Dr. Safar's visionary out to the world. And it was an amazing feat that by the time we were finished the training, there was nothing in this country like it before. So we even played a pivotal role in the design of the EMS units that you see today.
You know, that's something that Dr. Safar, is it?
Yes.
Dr. Safar was trying to convince the culture that this needed to happen. The culture didn't believe him.
Correct.
And so he had to go to those who were marginalized and discriminated against, but had amazing creativity and work with those folks, you know, which this is why this is so intriguing, because it's like every time we go against something, you know, it really proves to be something that we've needed a lot of times, you know, and just, you know, keep going. But I just thought that's such a point, that he was trying to get something across to people that was true, but they had to prove it. He had to prove that it was true. And so he utilized the creativity of the Black man to make that happen.
And you're absolutely correct. And the remarkable thing about the makeup of the trainees is that we were labeled as the least likely to succeed. Society's throwaways, if you will, are hardcore unemployables, which we were unemployed or underemployed, but to label an individual that says nobody would hire you. So we had these type of hurdles and barriers to overcome. And as I think about that, I often think society made one mistake. It didn't tell us So we were living in the moment and creating a system that's emulated or copied across the country, if not the world today. And it's glorified on television. So it's just amazing. Even today, believe it or not, it boggles my mind as to how far ahead of our time we were. It's just mind-boggling. And I mentioned the design of the EMS unit, that seat that's at the head of the patient, the onboard oxygen, the suction unit, the blood pressure cuff. And I often like to use this example. Unfortunately, our country is in an opioid crisis. And the drug to treat that is Narcan. So everyone has it. You can buy it over the counter. Unfortunately, the addicts themselves have it. First responders have it. But what the world doesn't know is Freedom House gave Narcan back in 1973. So to them, it's this, to the world now, it's this wonder drug. But to us, it's nothing new. We've had it for so long. And it's amazing because we had a very ingenious way of administering it. We would take an unfortunate individual that had overdosed. There was no fentanyl back then, so it was heroin. And we would start an IV on them and gradually give it to them, not just inject it into them and stuff. So essentially, very few drug overdoses woke up in the back of our vehicles. And it was intended to do that because oftentimes when they woke up, they became combative. They perhaps went through withdrawals. So we didn't want that to happen. So we kind of monitored you and kept you intentionally in a confused, dazed, sometimes unconscious state until we could get you into the emergency room in a more controlled environment. So that's to me, that just boggles my mind as to how far into the future we were that nobody really wanted to give us credit for.
Yeah, it's an example of how, hard times can make you creative. It can cause you to do things or think of things that you may not think of if everything is going well for you, And as you were talking, I was just thinking about that. I was thinking, okay, you got 25 black men, and there were some women in the mix, right?
Yes.
Black women. There were a couple white folks that were in the mix with you all as well, right?
Yeah, they came on later on in the years. Yes.
And then you all had a relationship with the Jewish community.
Yes. Yes. One of the things about Freedom House is that it depended on foundations for grants and donations and things of that nature. So it was somewhat difficult to be on solid foundation from a financial component. Right. So as a result of that, here's this creativity again. We approached the city of Pittsburgh and said, look, for X number of thousands of dollars, we will provide emergency care to the business district downtown, because we were only allowed to deal with the Hill District and Oakland area. Right. So we entered into an agreement with the city and to provide emergency care to the downtown business district. And, unfortunately, later on, that ended up being our downfall. But it just, to me, shows how creative, like you said, a group of individuals were that society as a whole couldn't even envision today.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, because we're going to go back to the sort of the central part of your experience as the first, EMS workers. But I want to talk a little bit about how you grew up and what it was like when you were growing up in Pittsburgh and the school you went to and your family. I want to hear a little bit about that.
Well, my lifespan is rather unique. And I wasn't born in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, which was completely segregated at that time in the 60s. Yeah. And The ironic thing about it is if you think about segregation, you think people have a choice, but it was the law at that time. And my parents died when I was, my mother died when I was about 5, and my father had to make the ultimate decision. And today I wish I could have thanked him, but he had to accept the fact that he could not take care of a 5-year-old, and I had a 3-year-old sister. And so he gave us up. He placed us in an orphanage in Atlanta, Georgia, and we were there for roughly about 7 years. And my sister and I got adopted by a family here in Pittsburgh that we had no idea we had. So we
This was your blood family? Okay.
had never had any association with them at all.
Okay.
And so this woman appears in our life that we had never known, never heard of, didn't know, and asked us, could she adopt us? Now we're living in an orphanage with roughly about 80 other children. And as I look back on that, in most instances, you could look at it as a traumatic experience. Mm-hmm. But I don't look at it as a traumatic experience. I look at it as a preparatory type adventure, preparing me for the hurdles and barriers and shortcomings that I was going to face later on in my life that I didn't know. Yeah. So I come to Pittsburgh and move in with this family, and there were other family members that were there. And it's ironic because as I look at it, I didn't know how to live in a family environment because I'd been away from it. I was 13. So you look from 5 to 13, yeah. I was more or less in a survival mode. So I didn't know anything about living in a family environment. I wasn't used to someone hugging me or shaking hands or an example that we take for granted. Okay, I didn't do well in school. Here's my report card. Those types of things, anything that goes on in a normal family, I was not accustomed to. So that was a challenging environment at that time. And so, I had to adapt to that. That was a different world that other people take for granted that family is everything for people. But from my standpoint, I never had one. Mm. So all of a sudden I moved in and I had to adjust to that. Mm. And so, I went to Fifth Avenue High School and graduated from there. And I went to college shortly after graduating and, was confused as to what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be. And it's ironic because I worked at J&L Steel Mill, which is right down here on 2nd Avenue. And I looked at the individuals there, and in my mind, I wanted to wear the white hat because the white hat was supervisory personnel. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I said, okay, well, I'll stay here until I can get that white hat. But unbeknownst to me, people that looked like me were not getting white hats at that time. So I left there and took a hospital job and worked there for about 4 years. And that's how I encountered 2 Freedom House paramedics. And they walked into the room that I was in, and it was something about these guys. They commanded the attention of that room. They didn't have to say anything. Their uniforms were crisp and nice, and they had a portable radio that was saying something. They had afros and beards, which was the style back then, because I had one myself. And so I kept watching these guys, and once they left, I had noticed a patch on their uniform, and it said Freedom House Ambulance. And I said, that's what I want to do. I said, okay. Now, I didn't know where they were, so if you can conceive this, I went to the Yellow Pages, which most people have difficulty realizing, and I found out where their offices were located, which was at Presbyterian Hospital. And I went there and walked in, and I said, I'm here to put in an application. So I'm a hospital orderly. I've bathed patients. I've made beds. I've, transported them here. I put in Foley catheters. How difficult would this job be? Walked in, the guy says, okay, if I showed you a picture of the heart, would you be able to diagram the circulatory system? No. If I showed you a picture of the lungs, would you be able to diagram the respiratory system? No. He says, okay, well, you're not qualified to work here. So I left there, and that little voice in the back of my mind kept saying, okay, John, you wanted that job. It's up to you to find out how to get it. So I went back to the Yellow Pages and found out where there was an EMT course at the North Park Fire Training Academy. I went there, and it was 13 weeks, twice a week, passed the course, got my certificate, and went back to Freedom House and got hired that same day. And as I say, the rest is history.
That's amazing, man. That is amazing. This is some of the things that you're saying now I did not know. I didn't know you were adopted, and when I think of that journey, and I think about how, being 13 years old, that's a very, very critical time in the life of a human being. Yes. When you're 13. Yes. I mean, talk about a roller coaster ride. Emotions, all kinds of stuff is going on. But then you and your sister were in that place with 80 other kids.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that you would have went from there being taken away and put into an orphanage to being the first person to be a EMS worker and coming out of the city of Pittsburgh, and then coming from the Deep South.
Yeah.
On top of all that.
Yes.
I mean, all the odds were against you, man.
You're absolutely correct. And as I look back at it, I have to admit that my path was already ordained. There was nothing I was going to be able to do about it. There was nothing was going to stop it because it was already ordained. I didn't know that at the time. I looked at it as a struggle and a trial and things like that. But you have trials and tribulations for a purpose. And each one you go through prepares you for that next struggle, that next hurdle you're going to have to overcome. Yeah. So at the time, I wasn't looking at it that way. But, as I look back today, I could see how my whole path was ordained all the way up until this point. Didn't know it.
I want you to talk a little bit about, tell us a little bit about some of your colleagues, some of the ones that came through with you that, went through those trainings. And, maybe you can tell us a little bit, you don't have to tell us about all of them, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of their lives before they actually got into the program and where they came from. Because all of them came from somewhere.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And as I think about the individuals that worked at Freedom House, I like to look at them as people that refuse to allow their past to determine their future. And some of them basically had really troubling lives that perhaps they didn't graduate from high school, obviously was unemployed. Since I don't have a job, maybe I'll stand out here on the street and just watch the world pass me by. So each and every one of the individuals that worked there, we all had a story behind us. And we all had to overcome that part of our life that society looked at it as a negative portrait of the individual. So you can look at individuals that perhaps didn't complete high school and may have had a substance abuse issue, whether it was with drugs or alcohol. There were people that were comfortable not having a job. So each one of us had our own trial that we had to overcome. But it's amazing that I look at the individuals that were able to overcome those trials that go on to successful careers. Some became teachers. Some went on to became public safety directors in other cities. I myself went on through the city of Pittsburgh and rose to the rank of assistant chief prior to my retirement there. So if you look at the individuals that were there, we all knew that hurdles were a part of our daily lives, and we were not about to allow that to interfere with our goal that we were trying to obtain. And don't get me wrong, we didn't sit around and say, woe is me, or my parents didn't do that, I didn't have a father, and stuff. And it's amazing to me that those discussions were never there. We all knew that we had different trials, but we didn't discuss them. We didn't try to keep them hidden. It's just that we were living in that moment, trying to provide a service to an underserved, neglected neighborhood, that we put all those pasts behind us and made the people of the Hill District a top priority at that time.
That's something, I was thinking as you were talking, you all, you came from different places, but you all had one thing in common. You were Black in America. And that was it turned out to be an opportunity. It actually turned out to be a stepping stone.
Absolutely.
No matter how hard the circumstances were, or how many times someone may have tried to hold you down, y'all were focused. Y'all were driven.
Yes.
You were determined to succeed.
And you're absolutely correct. And we refused to be a product of our environment. Without hope or future. And in doing that, we were able to create something that people take for granted today. Yeah. And that's the mind-boggling thing that I look at every time I think about Freedom House Ambulance Service. How creative we were. Just to give you an example, there were times when we didn't get the calls in our district that the police were supposed to give to us. So what we had to do is we had to come up with a way to overcome that. So we went out and bought a police scanner, and we monitored the police calls. And every time a call came in our district, we would self-dispatch to that call, and oftentimes beat the police there, treat the patient, and pass the police on the way to the hospital while they're still going to the person's home.
Well, you're a little bit ahead of me, because I was going to ask you about some of those specific experiences that you had when you were trying to help people. Mm-hmm. You were trying to help people in an environment and in a culture where white people didn't want to be touched by Black people, where they felt like they were going to turn Black, or they felt like, some other kind of thing was going to happen. Back in those days, there were a lot of superstitions. Even among Black people, there were superstitions. But, with the racism being the way it was, you all were challenged from top to bottom.
And that's a great way to put it. It really is, primarily because there were cases that I personally experienced where the white patient didn't want me to touch them, just take me to the hospital. So I had to come up with a psychological way of dealing with that issue. And I would inform the patient, okay, if you don't allow me to do the skill or procedure that I'm trained to do, then the chances of you getting to the hospital are starting to dwindle for every time you refuse to allow me to do that. And oftentimes that would work. I even had encounters with the police where they would be on the scene of, say, an automobile accident, and we would arrive there and find them literally pulling the patient out of the vehicle, and the steering wheel is bent and the windshield is cracked, and I would try to correct them on their method of treatment. And what you're dealing with oftentimes is a white male with a gun, a badge, and a nightstick. So I was called specific names and told where to go and things like that. There was no police accountability during that time. So I had to kind of relinquish control of that situation. And if you add to that, think about the emergency rooms themselves. They were not accustomed to people that look like me coming in with a patient that perhaps had an IV on them, or perhaps I'm telling you what their heart rhythm is, I'm telling you what their blood pressure is, and I'm telling you what medications they're on, and their lung sounds and things. The emergency rooms were not accustomed to that. So we had to train them. So in training them, we were met with different challenges. I'm the first person in this country to perform a procedure that exclusively designed to be performed in the operating room. It's called tracheal intubation. And I recall, as if it happened yesterday, I walked into the operating room at Presbyterian Hospital with Dr. Peter Saffer. He was chairman of the anesthesiology department as well as the critical care medicine department. And I was told to report to him on a particular date. He didn't tell me why. And I entered the room, and we were standing in the doorway, and everything stopped. The surgeons stopped doing what they were doing. The OR technicians and other people, they all stopped and they looked at the door and looked at me. And I saw them there, and if you can remember, they had amphitheaters in operating rooms where medical students could look down and see a procedure. And the only way I can describe that is that they were not used to seeing someone that looked like me that didn't have a mop or a bucket. But I didn't have that. So I walked in and went to the head of the patient and performed this tracheal intubation, which is a procedure where you put a tube down a person's mouth into their trachea so you can actually breathe for them. And oftentimes in an operating room, they stop the person from breathing. So this person was laying there on the table unconscious and not breathing. Failure was not an option when I did that procedure, because had I failed, paramedics today would not be able to do that procedure. So unbeknownst to me, less than a week later, I did the procedure in the operating room successfully, that I would take it from the operating room out into the field and do it in a person's home. It had never been done before. And that itself, and you're talking about challenges, the minute I did it, we took the patient to the hospital, take them into the emergency room. I got challenged by the doctor. Who told you to do this? I informed him, and who are you? I'm John Moon, and I work for Freedom House Ambulance Service. So the emergency room themselves were not accustomed to, now it's normal.
Yeah.
You wouldn't dare show up with a patient that you didn't have a report to give to the emergency room staff on what you did and what happened to them and things like that. But they were not accustomed to that happening back then. So we had to train the emergency rooms within, our hospital designations that this is something that's going to happen in the future. We didn't know it, but we had to train them too.
Let me ask you this, the white people who worked with you all, the doctors that, kind of brought you together and everything, what, other than their desire to really test out their theories, was there a personal relationship that you all had back then that kind of put you all on the same kind of level from a human standpoint?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question, primarily because earlier on, during Freedom House's tenure, we had what they call medical directors. And oftentimes they would come in and I like to use the term pad their resume and then move on to better things. So we kind of got used to, and the doctors always were white, so we got used to that happening. And until one female doctor came, and she was met with skepticism and mistrust because we knew here's this white woman coming in to pad her resume and she's going to move. But what we didn't know is her name was Dr. Nancy Caroline. She was different. And what we didn't know at the time, and she didn't either, is that she had to earn our trust. And in turn, we had to prove to her that we were confident in doing the skills that she wanted us to do. And it took, a few months for that to happen. And once we figured out she was part of us and was caring about us and was looking out for us and for our best interests, it was like a marriage made in heaven. She rode on the vehicles with us. She worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, monitoring what we were doing and things like that. So she had a very vested interest in each and every one of us. There's no doubt in my mind that she had to overcome the naysayers that said, how could you go over there and waste your time with those misfits, for lack of a better term. So she was totally committed to us. So it was a love type of relationship that we would carry her, we would take her into the Hill and go in the restaurants with her and take her into calls and where there were drug overdoses and abandoned buildings and stuff like. She would go right in there as a part of the crew. And in turn, she was able to open doors in the various specialty units in the hospitals that we were never able to get into. Wow. So if you can imagine a 5-foot-tall Jewish woman walking down the halls of a hospital with 4 black men with afros and beards, walking right into the intensive care unit, not stopping at the door or the desk or saying we're here, but walking right up to the patient's bed and challenging us on the condition of that patient in an intensive care unit. What kind of medication? What's the side effects of it? How much is it? What's the heart rate? What is the blood pressure? What do you expect to occur? What are the side effects of the drugs? So she was totally committed to making sure that we were the best that we could be, and she was very successful at it.
That's amazing. She was a woman.
Yes.
So she was also being discriminated against.
Absolutely.
Then on top of that, she was Jewish. Mm-hmm. So she was doubly discriminated against, but sounds like she didn't have much fear.
She didn't.
Sounds like she was fearless.
She was very fearless, and she was someone that had shown us early on that I'm not like those others, that I'm different. I care about you and it's interesting because she never heard of a paramedic, didn't know what one was. Wow. But she took on that challenge. She was a doctor.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's something.
Yeah, took on that challenge. And in doing so, she was able to get the grant from the federal government to write the manual, Emergency Care in the Streets, by using Freedom House's people.
Honestly, this interview is just, to me, as long as it is, it's going to be too short. Because there's my head is spinning with questions and just thoughts about all the dynamics here, all the different dynamics that are in play that are speaking to the larger society about how we as human beings need each other, how everything is about people.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And just listening to how the doctors came into play, how they needed you all, and you all did this, and then the lady came in, and she's a doctor. She had never known anything about EMS, and you all taught her, on and on and on. She's able to get into these doors. She's fearless. And, I don't see these things as a coincidence.
Oh, no, not at all. You're absolutely correct. It was all, and you know as well as I do, these were all preordained to occur without us even knowing it.
Yeah.
Without even having a vision, because we were creating something that the world takes for granted now. But back in the 60s and early 70s, like I keep saying, we were just living in the moment. We had this one challenge, is to make sure this community gets the best possible treatment that they could get, because we were from that community. So we had the empathy and the compassion for the residents of that community, and we were not going to allow anything negative to occur to a person under our watch. And that's mind-boggling.
Tell me, now, these days, you're doing speaking across the country in different places. Talk a little bit about some of the places that you've gone and some of the venues where you've spoken and some of the people that you've spoken to.
Well, one of the crowning moments that I'd like to talk about is my heart's desire is to keep this part of history alive. And in doing so, a couple of accomplishments have come to fruition. There's a book that I collaborated on called American Sirens. It chronicles the history of Freedom House. And it also talks about the part of my life that I mentioned to you earlier. That's very successful. People around the country are gravitating to it. I go on a number of book tours to sign copies of the book with the author. So I've been to Atlanta, Georgia, where the book was launched in September of 2022 at the Jimmy Carter Library. I've gone to Austin, Texas, to Baltimore, Maryland, to Washington, D.C., to Tampa, Florida, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. These are all going to different conferences and talking about the book, and I'm also talking about Freedom House itself. Last month, I was in Austin, Texas, at the National Association of EMS Physicians, which was their 40th anniversary of the organization, and I was brought in as the keynote speaker. And that was a monumental task that I didn't know was being prepared for me to talk about the history of Freedom House. And so you look at that, and then we have an Emmy Award-winning documentary that I and a couple of my colleagues starred in that's being shown around the country now. So if you look at these different types of venues and the accomplishments, the City County Building has a massive display honoring Freedom House for Black History Month. And right now, I'm doing a lot of local speakings throughout Pittsburgh, Shady Side Academy. I go to a lot of different libraries to talk. Even here is really a fantastic venue, an opportunity for me to come to speak, because this part of history that has been dormant for well over 50 years is starting to rise to the surface now. And there's a lot of momentum behind it, and I do not take it for granted. It's actually taken on a life of its own, and I consider that a blessing.
Tell us about this the recent speaking engagement that you had when you went out and you had no idea how many people were going to be there and what kind of people. Talk a little bit about that.
That was in Austin, Texas. They flew me in there, and I got first-class treatment. Someone's picking me up in a limousine at the airport, and it was amazing because I pick up my luggage. There's a guy standing there with a sign with my name on it. So I get in there, and they take me to the hotel, and as first-class rooms, and I met with the group that was sponsoring it because you had to prepare for the event the next day. And I walked into this room, and I seen all these chairs there and stuff, and they were telling me that, okay, you're going to sit here, and we're going to have you mic'd up. This space is reserved for you. And I looked up on the stage, and the stage went from probably across the street all the way back to here. And I'm sitting there looking, and I said, okay, well, what's all this for? Well, that's for you. There are going to be close to 2,000 people here to hear you speak tomorrow. and I brought a PowerPoint. So I'm on this stage, and there's 2,000 people out there in the audience. I didn't see them. I knew they were there. And all of a sudden, I get introduced, and they all stand up. And they stood, and they stood, and they stood, and clapping, and for at least 5 minutes. Wow. And I'm just saying, okay, you all can sit down now. And they wouldn't sit down. Wow. And so I finally got to speak, and I spoke for roughly about a half hour. And once I finished, they stood up again. And they just wouldn't sit down. So I walked off the stage and go out into the hall, and believe it or not, there are people out there crying. Mm. I had no idea that, and it's interesting because what I wanted them to do is I wanted them to feel what these individuals and the challenges and the hurdles and the broken promises and the disappointments that we had to go through to create a system that you take for granted today. And they were all emergency medical service physicians and medical directors. So they were the top tier of their field. Mm-hmm. And EMS physicians is a specialty now because of Freedom House. Yeah, we designed the first medical director, the title itself. Paramedic, the name had never been created before. You know, so that's fantastic. And one of the things I think about is we were also victims of our own success. And what we didn't know at the time, because we were living in the moment, is that residents of Pittsburgh and the more affluent neighborhoods of the city decided to voice their concerns that how dare you allow this neglected, underserved, rundown community known as the Hill District have better medical care than I do, because they had to rely on the police. Mm. And so relying on the police, if you can picture a police wagon coming to your residence, two officers taking you up from your home and placing you on a canvas cot in the back, and then both officers get up front and then drive you to the emergency room. If something happened to you back there, you stopped breathing or your heart stopped beating, there was nobody back there to do anything for you. So you oftentimes arrived worse. So this is what they had to contend with. So they voiced their concerns to the mayor at that time and said, you know, I voted for you, I contributed to your campaign, I own this business, I own this $1 million mansion, or whatever the case is, you better do something. So he had to bow, Mayor Flaherty had to bow to the wishes of his constituents. And in doing so, there was no room in the plan for an entity such as Freedom House. Mm-hmm. So instead of expanding Freedom House, he started throwing hurdles in the way. Mm-hmm. If you can imagine, and this was an executive order from the mayor, an EMS system not being allowed to use its sirens to go on medical calls. Or, remember I said we had a contract with Pittsburgh. It was $50,000 or $100,000 or something like that for a year, which we relied on for payroll and things like that. So say, for example, every January we expected this check for $50,000. Maybe a check for $10,000 showed up. Mm. And maybe 3 months later, $5,000. And so all of these things had impacts on there. So what you're looking at is the political firestorm that we couldn't compete with. In doing so, Mayor created his own EMS system. He brought in an entire white organization into an urban environment. And basically, that was the norm. So we had to try to navigate those rough waters, the waters of politics and the waters of racism. And so we had to say, okay, this concept has gone as far as we could. So we entered into an agreement with the city of Pittsburgh that they would take all the Freedom House's employees, all of its equipment, and we wouldn't have to go through any additional training or anything like that because we'd already been trained by the best. Mm-hmm. Once Freedom House was dissolved and the people went there, the city of Pittsburgh reneged on the deal. Wow. It was in writing. The deal said you have to take all of Freedom House's people, but it didn't say you had to keep them. Mm. So Pittsburgh Emergency Medical Services, which I love today and it will always hold a special place in my heart, instituted a systematic way of getting rid of as many of Freedom House's people as it could. And it was very successful, 80% of them. Oh, goodness. And the thought behind that is that if you get rid of the people that made history, you also get rid of that part of history that they made. So you eliminate these people by putting them through stressful situations, constantly testing, shift change. I myself, I told you I was the very first person in this country to do a tracheal intubation in the field, wasn't allowed to do anything with the city of Pittsburgh. I had to play the role as an observer, all in an attempt to frustrate me to say, okay, y'all got this, I don't need to deal with it anymore. And during that time, I discovered, and this is where fate is starting to come in at, I was an observer with this crew. I couldn't talk on the radio, couldn't examine patients, couldn't drive the truck. We walked into a person's home and this person was unconscious, not breathing, and their heart was not beating. And the crew I was working with didn't know what to do. They panicked. Mm. So they turned around and looked at the person that wasn't allowed to do anything and said, you take over. So I started assigning duties and responsibilities to the remaining two members, and we subsequently saved the person's life. And that's great, but it had to be kept quiet. Wow. Because I wasn't allowed to do anything. So from that point on, I had to make a decision. I had to say, do you become content with remaining as an observer or a third person, or do you step up your game? And I had to step up my game to become more assertive, more vocal, more aggressive in treating patients and things like that, that I wanted the department as a whole to know who John Moon was. Mm-hmm. And as I did that, I became noticed, which resulted in perhaps promotions and things like that. And I had to deal with the different challenges of that because the department kept becoming steadily white. The individuals that I worked with, or the department as a whole, you're bringing in white applicants from the suburbs, so I'm coming into an urban environment. I got a preconceived idea on what it would be like. It's the most dangerous place in the world. So I had to prepare myself for it. So some of them brought knives and they had guns in their cars, and the vehicles even had handcuffs on them. The trucks were stocked with what I would call 7-cell flashlights. Not to find your way around in the dark at night, but to use it as a weapon because I'm in this urban environment. Right. You don't know what's going to happen. So imagine a paramedic coming to your door instead of knocking. at night taking this flashlight and banging on the door and stepping off to the side because you never know what's going to come through that door. So you have a complete service who had preconceived ideas on what it would be like. So you institute different policies and things to offset what Freedom House had used as a norm. You create a policy that I don't have to take you to the hospital because you call me. I make a determination as to whether you're sick enough to ride in my truck or not. And those were the norms. And as I'm looking at this, I steadily watched the department become steadily white. We went 10 years without hiring an African American. So I challenged the leadership of the department about that. And I became somewhat of a troublemaker, but I was able to get them to understand the importance of having a service reflect the community in what you serve. Right. So it was tasked to me to create the first diversity recruitment program in the city of Pittsburgh. And I used it as a format the same as Freedom House did. I went out into the community and recruited people that had no idea, no concept of what a paramedic or an EMT was, placed them into a training program, and paid them a salary while they were there. And once they completed the basics and moved up to the advanced, they got a step up in pay. And I was able to get the department to hold job vacancies over because I had invested all this money into you. I wouldn't want you to go work for somebody else. So they kept job vacancies over. So it was just a lateral move into the department. So they were guaranteed jobs. That became the norm. While I was there was no such thing as an all-white group of people being hired by Pittsburgh EMS. But there had to come a time when I wasn't there anymore, and subsequently the department went back to its norm way of doing things. And, you know, as I had my diversity recruitment program, don't think that I wasn't met with opposition. My name was carved in bathroom walls of the emergency rooms with racial statements and things like that. It got so bad that my boss requested that anytime a Pittsburgh EMS unit went to an emergency room, that security would go into the bathrooms to check to see if something was carved on the walls. And what I had to do is make a decision. And the more opposition I ran up against, the more determined I became. And I made sure that these individuals that I put into my training program that I designed, failure was not an option. Yeah. No matter what I had to go through to get them to pass, they did. And some of them are still there today. And I started this program back in 1990. And some of them are still there today. And others have been able to retire with a pension and move on to other venues and stuff. And that would not have happened had that challenge not been presented to Pittsburgh EMS.
You know, your life, John, is literally a roller coaster of experiences, ups, major ups and major downs and major back up again, major back down and back up again. And as I see you now, and I think about, I visualize you in that auditorium to talk with over 2,000 doctors. They wanted to hear you talk, and they couldn't stop clapping enough, just to give you the time to talk. Mm-hmm. Somebody was telling your story. Somebody was saying something, and they knew it was legit. When you're in a room with 2,000 doctors, they know that's legit. And I was sitting here thinking, you don't call yourself a doctor, but I think the University of Pittsburgh should give you a doctor's degree. A doctorate degree. I really do. I feel like they should honor you because they're now very much tied in with UPMC. And I think that they owe you such a debt of gratitude for the work that you have done. And we as a society, as Americans, we should be giving you all the honor that is due you, and not, and I'm saying this because I think, we want to give God the glory for everything, but we want to honor you because you went through it. You went through that pain. And as I listened to you talk about how they took it away from you, after you all did all that work, you did everything that was asked of you just to be able to go out there and save lives while the people who needed you were just cussing you out and disrespecting you, but you were still saving their life.
Right.
Still saving their life. And it was working. It was a monumental, such a vital service that was being offered to our society. And it went across the world. And, and it was that simple for the mayor to just take it, to chip away at it and just take it away from you. And, which it says so much about how we don't value the human part of what's going on here. It was all about color and fear, but the human part was not taken into consideration. And but I tell you, I believe that the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm saying this to all of you that are out there, all my friends who are with the University of Pittsburgh that I know and I respect, but John Moon, who I call Dr. John Moon, really deserves an honorary doctorate degree for the work that he has done. Nobody could write his dissertation except for him. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you for this interview, because this interview, like everything else that you have done, will go down in history. And I like to say will come up in history. It will be up in history, front and center, for young kids who are just getting started to know, to go back and look and see where the fundamentals started, the fundamentals of this thing. And I just want people out there all over the world to know that this is a moment in time where we get to hear from a living legend who started the whole thing. You've done something that had never been done before, and you changed the world. And I thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. And it's amazing that I'm here telling this story and bringing this part of history. And I'm just the platform or the vehicle that's being used to do that. It's not necessary, even though I talk about myself in it, but it's not so much about John Moon as it is about the Freedom House ambulance service, the Freedom House Corporation itself. Those were the trailblazers and the visionaries that played a very instrumental role in this process. And as I think about it, I owe a deep debt of gratitude to Freedom House that I'll never be able to repay, because they were able to get me my calling, which I didn't know was going to be a paramedic with the city of Pittsburgh, and I owe them that debt.
Wow, this is just amazing. Well, folks, this is Black History, closer than you think, and powerful, more powerful than you know. And we have had this wonderful opportunity to spend time with Mr. John Moon, with Dr. John Moon. And we want to say also on behalf of John, to all of those who came through with him, all of those who were chosen to do that work back in those days, we want to say thank you to you all. We want to give you honor and praise as well, because there is a reason why you did it. And now is that reason. Now, in a time when places in this country are trying to suppress Black history is emerging in spite of it. And even as Maya Angelou said, and still we rise. Here with John Room. So we want to say thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Black History Closer Than You Think.
Say it loud.
I'm Black and I'm proud.
That's what I'm talking about.